Welcome to the National Park Service's recorded webinar on applying for a Save America's Treasures grant. The Save America's Treasures grant program comes from the Historic Preservation Fund, and each year Congress makes an appropriation at their discretion to fund the program. The Historic Preservation Fund dollars come from offshore oil lease revenue, not tax dollars, with the idea being that a portion of that revenue that is earned from the destruction of one resource should go towards the preservation of another resource. The Historic Preservation Fund has several grant programs, Save America's Treasures being one, and those are managed by the State, Tribal, Local Plans and Grants Division within the Cultural Resources Department of the National Park Service in Washington, D.C. Today, we're going to talk about how to create a successful grant application. The Save America's Treasures program has some very specific statutory guidance that must be met, and we will cover those rules as we go through the webinar. Let's get started. The Save America's Treasures grant program is administered by the National Park Service in partnership with the Institute for Museum and Library Services, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the National Endowment for the Humanities. All the partners are very involved in the management and selection of the grants for the program. SAT, as we call it for short, funds the preservation and conservation work to nationally significant historic properties and collections. Nationally significant is a key eligibility criteria that we'll talk more about as we go through the webinar. The Save America's Treasures program requires a dollar-for-dollar minimum matching share. So for every dollar of federal funds that you ask for, you must have a dollar of non-federal funding. That can be in the form of cash or in kind, but must be well documented in your application. Individual projects are only eligible to receive one SAT grant in their lifetime. So individual structures or collections that have received funding through an SAT grant in the past are not eligible for additional funding through the program. This does not mean that an organization that has received funding before could apply for a structure or a collection that they manage that has not received funding in the past. So it is project-based and something to be aware of, and we'll describe for you later how to know if you received a grant in the past or not. Process and deadlines. All applications must be made through grants.gov. Paper or email applications will not be accepted. It is important for you to know that in order to apply through grants.gov, you must register in sam.gov. This is an overall government financial registration site. That registration can take up to 4 weeks, so please plan accordingly. This is not a grant program that you can apply for at the last minute. We will not grant extensions due to incomplete registrations in these systems. Both of these systems may be signed up for free, though there are some businesses out there that provide this service for a charge. You should not have to pay for it, however. The opportunity to apply for these grants typically begins in the fall with applications due in the winter. That does sometimes shift. To keep informed, it's best to do a saved search for the program on grants.gov, and it will notify you when the applications are available. Who can apply? States, local governments, including certified local governments, tribes, nonprofits, educational institutions, and federal agencies funded by the Department of Interior and related agencies, with the exception of the National Park Service. No sites or collections owned by the National Park Service are eligible to apply for funding. What do we pay for with Save America's Treasures? Specifically, preservation and conservation work to nationally significant historic properties and collections. These are very hands-on grants meant to take a collection or a site from a state of endangerment or threat into a stable condition. For preservation projects, the minimum request is $125,000 federal share, and the maximum is $500,000. So a project at the maximum level, we would expect to see at least $1 million budget, half being federal, half being non-federal. For collections, the minimum request is $25,000 federal share and the maximum $500,000 as well. Please note that the selection panel can, at its discretion, award less than the minimum grant request or may make other budget recommendations for aspects of the application they don't deem eligible or if there's limited funding available. For physical preservation projects, all structures must be listed in the National Register of Historic Places at the national level of significance, not state or local, or as a National Historic Landmark. Properties may be listed individually or as part of a historic, contributing to a historic district. If you have questions about this, I encourage you to contact your State Historic Preservation Office early in the process to determine if you are eligible to apply for this grant program. They are very familiar with the Save America's Treasures program and will be able to answer your questions. Properties must be listed at one of these designations by the deadline for the grant applications. For conservation projects, you must make the case for national significance in your application, as there isn't a list out there of nationally significant collections. What do we not pay for? We don't construct new buildings, acquire collections or historic sites, we don't do long-term maintenance, and we don't reconstruct historic properties. We don't move historic properties, nor do we work on properties that have been moved in the past and are no longer eligible for listing in the National Register. If you're working with a moved property, please contact your State Historic Preservation Office and confirm that that property is still eligible for the program. We don't fund cash reserve, endowments, or revolving funds, and we do not help pay for fundraising costs, even though we are asking you to provide matching funds for the project. We don't pay for work prior to the announcement of the award, so all grant work will take place once the grant is awarded. How are projects selected? Park Service personnel will first screen applications for eligibility criteria. This is to make sure your application is complete, make sure you are listed at the national level of significance, and that what you're asking for is eligible. Then qualified Park Service personnel will initially screen and make comments, and those projects that are deemed best qualified will move on to a federal employee selection panel. There is a panel for the collections projects with that relevant expertise and a panel for the preservation projects with relevant expertise for those projects. Those panel recommendations will then move on to the Secretary of the Interior, whose approval will be forwarded to the House and Senate Committees on Appropriations prior to announcement per the enabling legislation for this program. Reviewers' evaluations will be based solely on material provided in the application submitted on grants.gov. Additional materials not required or sent separately will not be considered. Letters of support sent separately will not be part of the application review. We encourage you to spend your time on the application and not on garnering letters of support. If there is a partner or a donation that is a significant part of your project, that is when we would like to see a letter of support outlining their contribution to the project. That would be most important. Once the grant applications are selected and the awards are selected, the Park Service will apply risk assessments to the projects on the programmatic and the financial side. So you may see some additional restrictions or recording required based on your organization's ability to handle a federal grant. A summary of the review panel comments is always available to applicants after the process is complete. Whether you are funded or not funded, we encourage you to seek out these comments as they are very helpful when writing another grant application. This program is highly competitive, and we often say third time is a charm. So please, if you do intend to apply again, and we hope you will, take the reviewer comments and edit your application accordingly. How do we evaluate your project? We have set evaluation and selection criteria. We're going to talk about a little bit here, but one of the primary ones is national significance. So if you're a collection, you are going to describe why that collection is nationally significant in your application. If you are a property, you are going to also describe that briefly and tell us that you are listed as a National Historic Landmark or listed in the National Register of Historic Places. You do not need to repeat for us the entire nomination, but you should definitely kind of summarize that if you're on the property side of things, building side of things. Properties not listed by the grant deadline are not eligible. The second evaluation criteria is threat. And so we want you to describe the current condition of the property, why it's threatened or endangered, and why you need this grant funding to eliminate that threat. The source, the nature, the extent, the severity should all be clearly argued, and I would encourage that your photographs back up your description of the threat. Mitigation of the threat. Tell us how you are going to eliminate it. How are you going to save and improve the preservation and existence of this collection or property for future generations? Clearly state what activities you intend to undertake to mitigate that threat, and know that any work that you do, especially on the property side of things, must meet the Secretary of Interior's guidelines for historic preservation and archaeology. Tell us how this is the next logical step towards the resources preservation. Next is feasibility. This is basically your chance to tell us why you as an organization are well qualified to manage this grant and preserve this resource. So talk to us about your timeline. Most projects are given 2 to 3 years to start. Tell us how you plan to complete the project in that amount of time, while meeting federal requirements and guidelines and documenting the required non-federal match. Tell us who's going to be involved in the program, who's going to be managing the finances, who is going to be your preservation or conservation consultant, if they are on staff, or if you plan to hire a consultant to do that. Finally, the Department of Interior has several priorities as part of our strategic plan, and you need to describe how your project advances those priorities. The two that are most directly related to the Save America's Treasures program are modernizing our infrastructure and restoring trust with our local communities. Modernizing infrastructure will most likely apply to most of the preservation projects because you are doing actual physical preservation to the building, but that might also apply to some collections projects as well. Restoring trust with the local community, how this project is going to provide research opportunities through the collection or access to a site are important ways that we can restore the trust in these historic properties and collections with the community. With every one of our grant programs, we get a lot of frequently asked questions. So we've compiled a few here in hopes that it will help you prepare your application and be competitive. First off, is there a local resource for your organization to contact for help with the application? We strongly encourage, especially on the property building side, that you contact your state historic preservation officer. They'll be able to help you with your National Register status, and answer questions in that vein. We also encourage you to work with perhaps a local nonprofit that does a lot of grant writing, or a university, or your another government agency that might be familiar. It's always helpful to have another set of eyes review your application before you submit. Can you use SAT grant funds to upgrade a building for ADA? Yes, this is an eligible cost for National Register listed buildings. Usually it is more competitive as part of a larger preservation project, not just focusing on ADA. How can you find out if your building or collection got funding before? We talked about this earlier in the program. You only can have one SAT grant per project. You can visit the SAT treasure map that's available on the American Architecture Foundation's website, and you'll see the link to that here in this webinar. Our organization would like to submit more than one application. Can we? Yes, you can. However, you need to understand that you're competing against yourself. And since this is a highly competitive program, we might encourage you to submit the stronger of the two, but there's nothing to say that you cannot. Can you apply for a collections and a preservation grant under one application? No, these are very separate opportunities in the grants.gov, as well as separate projects that will eventually be managed by separate agencies. So they must be applied for separately. For additional information on the program, you can go to our website. It's go.nps.gov/SAT. If you have questions about the grant application, your eligibility, the program, please send those via email to the State Tribal Local Plans and Grants Division. Our email is preservation_grants_info@nps.gov, or our phone line is available. We do not have a human that answers the phone, but we do check the voicemail daily and return your calls as quickly as possible. For grants.gov assistance, please contact grants.gov directly. They have a 24/7 helpline and provide support through email. This is not an aspect that the Park Service is expert on, so we encourage you, if you have a grants.gov question or a question about registering in SAM, please contact them directly. My name is Megan Brown. I'm the Chief of the State Tribal Local Plans and Grants Division, and I hope you found this webinar helpful, and we look forward to seeing your application, and please let us know if you have any questions. Thank you for your time.